Okay, hi everyone. This is just a quick video to walk you through how to do assignment 4. So I've got a VCV rack pulled up here on the left, assignment 4 on the right. I'm going to walk through the whole assignment because I know this is a new environment for us. So here's our assignment sheet. It says at the top that it's due Friday, April 10th. That's 1 week from today at the end of the day. And here's our instructions. Starting from scratch, design 2 patches in VCV Rack using any modules available. So you don't have to just use the fundamental modules. If you've downloaded a third-party module you like, you can use those. Both patches should be completed in the same VCV file, just in separate parts of the rack. So you could put one on a top rack, one on the bottom, one on the left, one on the right, as long as they're in the same file, but they're in different parts, so it's clear to me which is part A and which is part B. Says you can use the Bog audio mixer, or really any mixer, to selectively mute the outputs of each part of the patch as you work. So what that means is if you make part A and you want part A to be muted while you're working on part B, which makes sense, then you can use the mixer to go ahead and mute whatever you do in part A so it's not bothering you or making sounds while you're working on part B. So then you're going to record a short piece of music through VCV Rack, about 20 or 30 seconds, just like on previous assignments. One for each patch, one little 20 to 30 second excerpt for each patch. And then submit your recording file and the patch file, the .vcv file, via the Blackboard file exchange. And there's some specific submission instructions below. Both patches should include, and then I have a general overview of what I want in your VCV file for both patches, and then specific requirements for the first patch and for the second patch. So let's go over these general requirements first. The first one says we want an audio signal output through an audio module, and you can use the same audio module for both parts. Okay, so I'm going to go into VCV Rack. I'm going to go down to my fundamentals and grab the audio output. And I'm going to go ahead and set my device. You can choose whatever you want, built-in output or whatever. For me, it's going to be Soundflower since I'm making a video here. Okay, and then an audio signal is our audio signal is going to be recorded through the NISTHI recording module, and you can use the same recorder for both parts. So I'm going to go into VCV Rack. I'm going to choose my NISTHI modules, which you guys should have grabbed from the plugins library. And then I'm going to go up to where it says recording. And now these are all the NISTHI recording modules. There's actually a lot of them. I don't really care which one you use, but I think this master recorder on the right is the most straightforward. So we'll walk through how to set this up here in just a sec. But we talked about having a mixer involved. So let's go ahead and add a mixer. I'm just going to go up and click mixer here. Choose this Mix 4. Which is the Bog Audio one. You could use whichever one you want. If you want to use the fundamentals one, that's fine too. I just like the Bog Audio one for these mute buttons. Okay, so then we're going to connect our mixer to our audio output. So I'm going to take a red cable for audio and put it the left into number 1, which is what you're going to want to do. I'm just going to number 2 because that's what I need for this video. And then you guys would put the right in number 2. I'm going to then take the left output of my mixer and send that to my recorder. And then I'm going to take the right output of my mixer and send that into the right input of this recorder. And the way this recorder works is it's fairly simple. You just hit start to start recording and then stop to stop recording. And the only other option we have is, well, there's also these like trigger inputs if you wanted some part of your patch to trigger the recording to start or stop, but that's probably not useful for us for this patch. But then the only other option we have is to either choose file or autosave. If you leave it on autosave, whenever you hit start, it's just going to start recording. It's going to create a file in your rack folder on your computer and just name it with the date and the time. But because we want to name this whatever we want to name it with our last names or whatever so we can upload it to Blackboard, I'm going to put it on choose file. And then when you hit start, it's going to ask you to name your file and save it. But I'm not going to do that just yet since I'm not ready to record. But I've got my audio and my recorder set up. So then the next requirement is the patch cords are going to be correctly labeled with the following colors, like we've been talking about in the lessons. Red for audio, yellow for volts per octave, green for modulation, and then blue for gates, triggers, and clocks. So in case I need a reminder, I can go to, I don't know if you guys have downloaded it, but in the modular fungi modules, there's the Omri Cohen kind of reminder plate or explainer plate. So you could put that in your patch if you want it there as a reminder. And that's what we need for the basics. So then let's go ahead and look at part A. Part A says we want at least one VCO with pitch, that is volts per octave, controlled by the QWERTY keyboard or by a MIDI controller. So let's go ahead and move this down, and I'm going to go ahead and add an oscillator, and I'm just going to use the fundamental oscillator. So there's my oscillator, and now I need to control that with some MIDI. So I'm going to use that MIDI CV input in the fundamental modules. And I'm going to connect the volts per octave to the volts per octave. And then I'm going to choose my MIDI device, which for me, for right now, I'm just going to use the computer keyboard. Okay, and then I can send the output of my oscillator into the mixer, and we can hear that. And we're going to use a red cable for audio since we're hearing this. Okay, so then the second requirement is we want to have a slew limiter adding audible portamento. So we're going to go, actually I'm going to make some space because my slew limiter is going to go after my MIDI and before my oscillator. And now we're going to go to slew limiters. And remember, there's not a slew limiter in the fundamentals, the fundamental modules. So I'm going to go up here to slew limiter. I've got some third-party ones. There's a Bog Audio one, which works fine. We use the Bufaco one in our lesson, so I'm going to stick with that one. And so the volts per octave is going to stop off in the slew limiter and then go out into the oscillator. And then I'm going to add, well, first of all, I never even tested that my keyboard was working. Okay, so that works. So now I'll add some rise time. And now we'll add some comparable fall time. Maybe I'll change the shape a little bit. You can do whatever sounds best to you. Okay, so we got that. Now we want at least one LFO audibly modulating the frequency of the VCO. So I'm going to add an LFO. I'll just use the fundamental one. We'll use the little one, why not? I'm going to take a green cable output to the FM input, set my frequency wherever I want it, my waveform. I'll just maybe leave it there as the default for now. And we're not hearing any of this modulation yet because I need to bring up this FM CV knob. Now that's kind of a lot of modulation. It's not going to be very easy for me to hear that portamento, so I'm going to bring the modulation down to where it's kind of subtle. Now I can still hear my portamento whenever I hit a key. In fact, maybe I'll change the waveform and make it a little faster. So now when I play a key, I can still hear that portamento in addition to my modulation. Okay. And then the last thing we need on patch A is one of these following two options. So you don't have to do both of them, you just pick one. The first one says a second VCO whose phase is synced by the first VCO. Okay, well we can do that. I'm going to grab a second VCO. Maybe I'll even use VCO2 to add a little variety in here. So here's our second VCO. We want to send the audio out from this one to our mixer also. And then we want to sync the output. So I'm going to take the output, one of the outputs from this mixer. Maybe I'll do the sawtooth wave. And we're going to use a green cable since this is a kind of modulation. And we're going to send that to the sync input on this oscillator. And then remember, we want this oscillator to be higher than this one. If it's lower, we're not really going to hear any difference. They're just going to be the same frequency. But if they're higher, we'll get those timbral changes. So you hear that characteristic syncing timbre. So I could leave it at that. I could be done, but just if you want to do the second option, a second LFO modulating the frequency of the first LFO. So, okay, I'm going to make a little room here. And add a second LFO. Here it is, and we just want to slightly modulate the frequency of the one giving us our vibrato. So I'm going to take a green modulation cable, send that to the FM of this LFO. Maybe I'll change the waveform to something that's easy for me to hear. I'll go up to a square wave, which is all the way to the right. So you can hear when the square wave is up, the modulation gets faster. When it's down, it's slow. And that's all I need for part A. So I can go ahead and record, but I'm going to actually wait to record until I have both patches. So I'm just going to mute these for right now. And now let's start on part B. I'm just going to scroll over here and do part B on the right side. So part B says we want a VCF filtering the signal from a VCO. So that means we're going to need a VCO and a VCF. So here we go. So we're going to send the audio output from our VCO into our VCF, and then we can take that and send that to our audio module or to our mixer. And maybe I'll make this a sawtooth wave, which if you remember is, we can look at it in a scope. Kind of make that to where it's sawtoothy looking. There we go. Because I want to have a lot of harmonics. So we have something to filter. So I'll make a timbre that sounds good. Maybe add a little resonance. Okay. So then the filter's cutoff frequency is audibly shaped or modulated by an envelope generator or an LFO. By the way, I should stop and point out that part B is going to be assessing skills that we're going to be introducing on Monday of next week. So I know we haven't actually talked about filters yet. We haven't talked about envelope generators or VCAs. I mean, we obviously have with the MS-20s, but not in VCV rack. So we're going to be looking at that on Monday. So this stuff might seem a little weird, might seem a little new to you right now. So if it does, you could just pause right now and come back to this after Monday's lesson. But I figured we'd go over it all in the same video here because that makes sense. Okay, so our VCF is going to be audibly shaped or modulated by an EG or an LFO. So let's do an EG this time. Here's our envelope generator. We set some attack, decay, sustain, release. I'm just going to leave it as these defaults for right now. And then I'm going to take the output and modulate or shape the envelope generator or the filter. So we're going to go into the frequency of the filter right now. And we need some way to trigger this envelope generator. So I'm actually going to just take the gate from my keyboard, which I'll just use the same keyboard module way over here. And we use blue cables for gates. So I'm going to come over here, send that in right there. And now whenever... so we're not hearing anything because I need to adjust this frequency CV knob. So now whenever I hit a key, we can hear that envelope shape, and there are these little lights that show us where we are. So that's handy. Maybe I'll bring it up to make it even a little more apparent. All right. Okay, so then we want a VCA that is shaped by an envelope generator. So I'm going to add our VCA right here. And then we need to shape this with an envelope generator. It doesn't say it has to be a different one, so I'm going to go ahead and just use the same envelope generator that's shaping my filter. So I'm going to take the output here, green cable, because this is still a kind of modulation. We're going to send that to the CV. And then we're going to take the audio from our filter and run that through the CV, or the VCA. So that's going to go in here before it goes into the mixer. So now we don't hear anything until I press a key. And so the same filter, same ADSR envelope is controlling the filter and the VCA. You could use two different ones and plug one into the VCF and one into the VCA. Either would be fine. And it also says you could modulate the filter with an LFO as well if you wanted to do that, so that's fine. So now when I press a key, I'm getting this envelope, but if you notice, it's always the same pitch. I'm actually playing different keys. That's because I never sent any pitch control to my VCO2. Now, VCO2 doesn't have a volts per octave input. It's only got an FM input. But as I will remind you guys next week, I forgot to mention this in the last lesson, if we turn the FM CV all the way up, then our FM input can act like a volts per octave input. So I'm just going to go all the way over here to my keyboard. This isn't required for the assignment. I'm just doing this because I want it to make sense to me. I'm going to take the volts per octave out, send that into my oscillator, make sure this is all the way up. And so now whenever I press a key, I'm actually getting the correct pitches. Okay, so then the last requirement for part B is the envelope generator or envelope generators are sent a gate from the QWERTY keyboard or MIDI keyboard or from a pulse wave LFO. And so we have that actually already. I don't even have to do anything. The gate is coming from my MIDI keyboard and then going into my envelope here. But let's say that I wanted to use a pulse wave LFO to trigger my envelope. This is something we're going to talk about on Monday. So I'm going to grab an LFO here. And let's, instead of taking the gate from our keyboard, we're going to take a square wave here. And that's triggering our LFO, or sorry, triggering our envelope generator. We can make that as fast or slow as we want. Just leave it there in the middle for now, why not? Okay, and so now, the pitch will still change when I change the keyboard, but the keyboard is not any longer triggering the envelope generator, the LFO is instead. All right, so I'm going to mute that one. I've got both patches done. Now I'm ready to record. So I'm going to make sure this is on choose file. I'm going to hit start. I'm going to name this file, save it to my desktop, last name, number 4. So now I'm recording already. So I'm going to go over here, unmute my part A stuff, and play a little ditty. Okay, that was not amazing, but hey, it works. And then I'm going to come over here, let there be some silence in between while I'm still recording, because I want to have that little gap, just like we have in previous assignments. So I'm just going to let that run while there's let there be a little silence in between each part. Now I'm going to unmute this one. Maybe I'll fade this one out real nice. Okay, then I can mute that. I can stop my recording. And now I can save this patch because I want to save this so I can upload it to Blackboard. So I'm going to save it as to my desktop. Same name, last name, number 4 or 04 or just 4, whatever. And now before I upload these, excuse me, I'm going to check my audio recording and make sure it has what I expect it to have. So I'm going to open my Finder, go to my desktop, find that Hayden 04. I'm going to open that in Audacity, or just drag it down. And sure enough, here is part A, which is clearly very loud, and then part B over here with some silence in between. So we could listen to this and check it, but I can tell from looking that this is okay. So then these are both ready to upload to Blackboard, and that is how you complete this assignment. So in the end, your submitted assignment should consist of 2 items, one .vcv file with both patches separated, so I can clearly see which one is which. One sound file, wave or MP3. The NIST recorder is just going to record a wave file. So unless you want to convert it to MP3, which is would make your upload faster, but is not necessary. Either is fine. Containing an excerpt for each patch separated by silence. So we've got that. And I'll look forward to seeing your guys' patches. So if you have any questions, please let me know through the discussion board. That way, if you have a question that other people will also have, we can all, they can read the answer, and because very likely when you have a question, somebody else has the same question. So send me questions through the discussion board, and I will talk to you guys next week.